Hey guys, my name is Donnie and welcome to my channel. And in today's video we're going to start or continue working on the motorhome. So let's jump into it and I'll show you what I plan on doing this week. So guys, as you can see, I've already started acquiring some of the materials, some aluminium square tubing and some aluminium sheet metal to start building this motorhome's frame. And I've also gone ahead and I printed out some of the images that I did draw on CAD, so that I'll have the measurements at hand when I start making the frame and so on. And my main focus at first is going to be to work on what's going to become the cab area. Even though it's going to be one piece, I think the best plan of attack is to start working on this section here, because there's a lot of mechanical headaches that's going to go into this part, like for instance the clutch and the brakes and accelerator and the steering column and so on, and where the driver and the passenger is going to sit and how the firewall is going to look like and everything like that. So I'm going to focus on that, but I need to build this vehicle from the bottom up. So the first thing that really needs to happen is I need to have a frame onto which everything is going to be built. And this is what this picture is all about. This is going to be the frame, or the aluminium frame, that's going to go on top of this chassis, and that's where all the magic is going to happen. But I'm only going to focus on the first section of this frame, because I don't want to build the frame completely at this stage, because as you can see, my workshop is a little bit small and it's going to extend far beyond where that end of that chassis is. So I'm just going to focus on building the front part first, and then I can start working on what's going to become the firewall and so on, and then I can work on stuff like where the steering column's going to go and the brakes and the clutch and everything. Now guys, as you had probably noticed, we decided on using aluminium as to make our frame for this vehicle, and some aluminium sheet metal and so on, and we're going to be using fiberglass and all of only the lightest weight materials that we can get our hands on. And there's a very good reason for that, and that is because here in South Africa there is a weight limit that if you register a motorhome below a certain weight, which is 3,500 kilograms, then you are able to drive it with a normal driver's license. And we are going to do our utmost best to keep this vehicle below that weight. That's why we're using all of these rather expensive materials, so that we can keep below that weight. And I think at the end of the day it's going to be advantageous for many reasons, because the lighter the weight of a vehicle, the lighter it is on fuel, and so on and so on. So that's what we're going to be doing, and that brings me to the first critical point that we need to address before I start working on this vehicle, and that is that I need to know what the weight is of this chassis, so that I can keep tabs on that as I build the vehicle. And that brings me to this little tool that I built in a previous video. This is a scale that I made that I'm going to be using to weigh this chassis. And guys, there is a link to the video of how I built this. I'll put it up here somewhere if you guys would like to go and see what that's all about. But it basically, what I did was I used a bathroom scale and a bathroom scale's innards that is only limited to 150 kilograms, but I used the power of leverage, and basically it divides the force that is applied to this plate by 10, so that the digital output that is over there is 10 times less than what is weight on top of it. So if you apply a force of say 1 ton over there, it divides that force by 10 and it gives you a reading of 100, and you just put a 0 next to it and then you know exactly what the weight is. So I'm rather chuffed with that little tool, because buying these corner scales are rather expensive, and I have calibrated it. It is built in such a manner that I can calibrate the length of the lever, and I calibrated it using a couple of our cars, and I just went and looked at the disc and what the tare weight is of that vehicle, and I weighed the vehicle's corners and made sure that this thing is calibrated perfectly, and it works very, very well. So guys, the way that you use one of these corner scales is that you lift the wheels off the ground, and you need to lift both the left and the right, or the opposing wheels, from the ground equal height, So I'm going to basically lift that other wheel the same height as what that corner scale is, and this one also, and then put the corner scale in here and drop it down, and that would give me an accurate reading of what the quarter of this vehicle's mass is. And then I can multiply that by 2 if I don't want to put the corner scale on that side. But it's very important that you lift the other side the same amount as this side that you're going to be reading, otherwise you're going to get inaccurate readings. So I'm going to do that to the front, and then write down the measurements or the weight and multiply that by 2, and then I'll know what this axle's weight is, or the weight that is carried by these wheels. And then I'll do the same with the rear. I'm going to lift one side and then put the scale on the other side, drop it down, measure it, and then multiply that by 2, so that I'll know what the weight is that is carried by those wheels at the back, not the axles, the wheels, everything. And then I can add them together, and I'll know exactly what this chassis weighs and what the weight is in the front and the rear. And after I've done that, then I can start working on the chassis, because I know exactly how much all of this material costs that I've got so far, and I can just add that to the vehicle as I go along, and then keep tabs on what the weight is. Anyways guys, let me do the weight calculations quickly, and then we can continue with the front. Okay guys, I have now weighed this chassis, and it came out to 403 kilograms per wheel, so that's about 806 kilograms in the front, or 800 kilograms. And then at the rear I measured it at 322 kilograms per side, which is 644 kilograms at the back. And these two, and the front and the rear, adds up to about, or to exactly 1,450 kilos, or 1.5 tons, and that's the start, or the base weight that I'm going to be working with for this chassis. So I've got about 2,000 kilograms of leeway that I can now use to build this vehicle. So now I'm going to start working on this frame that I'm going to build out of aluminium, and I'm going to be making these cross braces, and they all line up with these mounting spots that I've got here on the chassis, the existing ones. But I actually need another one here in the front, and that's how my plans worked out. So I need to make another mounting spot over here, but I cannot weld or cut or do anything to this chassis. It's against the law. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these existing holes, and I've made these heavy duty angles that's going to just add one more mounting spot to this chassis, where I can then mount the aluminium frame onto. So let me just install that quickly, and then I can start working on the aluminium frame. Okay guys, so as you can see, I've now started cutting all of the aluminium to size, and the next step for me is going to be to start fitting or welding and everything together, and then mate this aluminium to the chassis. Now guys, the way that I'm going to be mounting this aluminium to the chassis is that it's going to be suspended from the steel chassis. The aluminium is going to be suspended with some rubber mountings that I'm going to be putting in between all of these spots over here. Now I do not have the rubber mounts yet, but what I've gone and done is I've cut from some pieces of scrap metal 16 40mm high offcut steel tubes. That's gonna be the same height as what my rubber mounts are gonna be. And I'm going to be fitting in there, and then I'm going to suspend this aluminium off of the steel, and then in a couple of weeks time I can replace that with the rubber when that comes. Now guys, the way that I'm going to be mounting it also is that you've got a couple of options. One would be just to drill a hole straight through the square tubing and then putting the square tubing on top of that, mounting, and then just tightening it down. But that has got a big issue, and that is that it's going to most certainly squish the square tubing and deform it, and it will not be a very, very good structure. The other option would be if I drill a hole in there and then put an aluminium tube straight through and then weld it on both sides, top and bottom, making it nice and strong in there, and then putting a long bolt in between or straight through the aluminium tube, through the rubber, through the floor here at the bottom, and then tightening everything down. But there are at least two issues with that. And number one is that I'm not that good of a welder that I think it'll be structurally sound. And secondly is if this nut or bolt is protruding off of this aluminium at the top here, it's going to be in the way of the floor that's going to come in here. And even if I did make a recess in the floor, I'll never be able to reach that bolt again. So guys, the plan that I've come up with is I'm going to, instead of drilling a hole through the square tubing, I'm going to be making the mounting spot in between the cross members and the long members, and I'm going to be using some thick gauge aluminium and make a 45-degree fixture that I'm going to weld in between these two, and it's going to serve two purposes. One is that I'll easily be able to reach the top and then put a bolt or a nut through there and the rubber and so on. And then secondly, it's going to also serve as a gusset, making this connection between the cross members and the straight members very, very strong. So I'm going to be making those mounts out of aluminium and then start welding everything together. Now going to the front here is a little bit of a different story, because here is another mounting spot and I need to mount this aluminium over here. And I've come up with a design for a mounting spot that I'm going to make a mount. So I'm going to be fabricating that now, and as soon as I've got both sides done, I can then weld it onto this square tubing, and then I think I'm going to start working my way to the back and measuring twice and cutting once as many times as I possibly can to try and making sure that everything is square and everything is the way that I'm planned it to be. Anyway guys, let me start working on these mounts and then we can start welding everything together. Hey guys, there we go. I have now finished making all of the engine mounts that I think I'm going to need. And these engine mounts, I keep on calling them engine mounts, but they're frame mounts. These mounts came out looking quite good, exactly how I drew them or designed them. I was struggling very much to get in there and make these welds look pretty. So they're not pretty, but I know that they're very, very strong. And I welded them on both sides to make sure that it will never ever break free on my welds. These corners, these 45-degree angles that I made, that I'm going to be welding in over there, what I did was I made a little bit of a lip that's going to just help these plates be a little bit stronger so that they won't want to flex like this when they carry the weight of this vehicle and then want to tear at the weld. So that's just to give it a little bit of extra strength. What I've also gone and done is I drilled some pilot holes in there so that I can now fit them using these temporary 40mm spacers onto this frame, and then I can start making or building this frame and welding it onto those mounts. Now guys, another thing that I realized last night while I was building this thing in my head is that because this whole frame is one piece, I'm gonna, instead of only focusing on the front here, have to build the whole frame from the front to the rear now, because I need to be able to weld all of these spots that needs to be welded, either both on the top and also at the bottom. And if I only focus in the front now and start bolting everything together, I won't be able to reach the bottom of all of the rest of this frame that needs to be welded. So the best thing for me to do is to then rather build this frame as far as I possibly can, even though it needs to extend further than where my workshop is now. I'll be able to weld that at a later stage. I'm going to focus, or instead build the whole frame now, so that I can turn it over and weld the bottoms nicely, and then turn it over again and be sure that the whole thing is nice and strong. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fit these mounts with those spacers onto the chassis, and then I'm going to start spacing and placing all of these cross braces and start welding everything together, and let's see how far I get. Okay guys, there we go. This has been a long marathon of welding and cutting and welding and cutting, but guys, this is the basic frame. This is gonna be where everything, all the magic's gonna happen on top of this. And guys, this frame basically is the foundation on which everything is going to be built. So it was very, very important, and it is critical that this frame is super strong and will never ever fail me. So I made sure to weld all of these welds 360 degrees. As you saw, I flipped it around and I welded the undersides and everything, and I made sure that it was very, very strong, because if this frame ever fails, I'll probably have to take everything apart and completely scrap the vehicle and start all over again. So I'm very happy with this frame. I'm happy with what the mounts looks like. I'm still waiting for the rubber mountings that's going to go in between there. I've had them made especially for this vehicle, and I just want to say guys that those rubber mounts resolve two issues. One issue is obviously it's going to help eliminate any noise or rattles from the chassis or the road into the cab. And the second issue is that you cannot have aluminium like this, especially such a big area be in contact with any other conductive material, like for instance steel or so on, because it will cause a thing that is called galvanic erosion, and that basically means that the aluminium is going to start being corroded and be eaten away by the steel, and you don't want that. So that's what the rubber mounts are there for. The next thing that I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to start working on this cab area, make that firewall out of some more thick gauge aluminium, make the firewall for the cab so that I can then start connecting everything and do the mechanicals. But guys, I'm going to be doing that in the next video. This is going to be it for this video. I think it was a lot of progress, and this is going to be a perfect foundation for me to start working on. But in any case guys, I will see you next time. Cheers!